So, how y'all doing? It's Jared. Clip points, right? What is a clip point? And that's really just all in the name. This is a Cold Steel Trailmaster in '01 right here, if you're wondering, right? And this knife, for me, is kind of funny because I can really just envision, this is not what happened, it's not how this was made, but I can really just imagine something coming up and clipping this off, because the way that this wedge is done, it just looks like it's been pinched off, right? And so you can imagine this spine coming out all the way, extending out all the way, that belly coming up, having something like a traditional or a standard point, and something just clipping it off and getting this style of blade here. It's not at all what happened. Again, this, it was ground specifically like this, but the clip point, right? And the clip point actually encompasses the Bowie as well, right? And this is what I think of when I think of a Bowie. This is a Cold Steel Marauder, and you can see it's got that really heavy sweep. It's recurved, right, into the actual spine itself. So this doesn't look like a clip, you know what I mean? It's going to have to be like a giant set of fingernail clippers to come in here and actually clip this off and make this style of blade. But this is still a clip point because it just has that bit removed to actually form the tip. And I am a big fan of the clip point. I wouldn't say that it's my favorite overall blade shape. Well, actually, yes, I would. It is my favorite blade shape. It's not what I would choose. If you stranded me on a desert island, it's not the tip choice that I would preferably take. However, from an aesthetic standpoint, from just enjoying the appeal of it, it's got the Americana factor to it. Americans like to pretend like we invented the clip point. We really didn't, right? We did not invent this blade shape. There's multiple historic examples of swords and knives from across the world with a clip point, what would be considered a clip point blade design. But they were so heavily used, it was so prominent. There's the lore and the mythology behind the Jim Bowie legend. The sandbar fight in the 1820s, when that knife probably was something more reminiscent to this, not even a clip point. And so the Confederate Saber as well. During the American Civil War, a lot of those swords were clip point blade designs. They were using clip point knives. Just Bowie knives. This is what they were back in the day. And so it does have that appeal to it, for me at least. And it is a functional shape. What it really brings to the table, right, is being able to have a very stabby tip. Because if you watched my Tonto video, right, a flat spine really aids in penetration because it enables the cutting edge. It actually forces the cutting edge up front, the belly, whatever curvature, whatever shape you have up front, this section of edge to actually do the cutting. And you can notice here that this is almost a flat spine. And so there's going to be very little squeeze to actually forcing this into any material. If you're stabbing this into whatever you're stabbing it into, there's going to be very little force pressure this way. It's all going to be cut in by that cutting edge. That's not the case once you actually get past this point here, but it leads to a very stabby tip, and you're not sacrificing a whole lot of actual stock thickness, the actual thickness of the blade. Bring this one up here. So you can see the actual stock thickness of this blade here, right? And if I can get this thing to come back into focus for me, come on. You can see the stock thickness of this blade, and it comes all the way out to this point here. You can see that the flat ends about this point here on the actual blade. And so it doesn't have a whole lot of taper up into the actual tip. You can see that there. It's still a decently thick stock right up there next to the tip, but there's no material here. It's very narrow in this direction here. It's very narrow in profile, I guess, opposed to the actual stock thickness. It still maintains that stock thickness, and so you still have a decently reinforced tip. It's never going to be as good as something, like a reverse Tonto or even a Tonto for a robustness, for actual impact and penetration. It's not ever going to, be on that realm. But it's still very utilitarian because you have that very narrow tip. You have that very pointy tip. This is a hunting knife, right? This is a Crooked River from Benchmade. And you can see this design here, it's got a whole lot of belly, so if you need to skin anything, if you have to do any sort of slash cutting through material like that, meat, whatever it's going to be, you do have enough belly because it is inherently, you do have that with a clip point blade. You do have that belly coming up to actually meet the tip itself. And having that narrow tip, I mean, I've never actually cut apart an elk. I don't know specifically, but I would imagine having a narrow tip, being able to actually get into those little tiny areas and use this tip would be a major benefit. I mean, I'm not 100% positive on that, but I do imagine that a smaller tip with, being decently reinforced is a major positive, especially in the hunting realm. And I do know clip point knives. This is kind of an iconic hunting knife right here. This is a Buck 119 Special. That would be nice. And I like the fact that it's able to actually just penetrate into material quite well, because let me bring one of these little pieces of paper up, right? Use a CQC13 because it's got just this crazy blade shape, right? And so when I actually stick this into whatever material I'm sticking it into, you got to imagine that there's a whole lot of massive material behind it as well. I'm actually punching into something solid. This isn't just a piece of paper is what I'm talking about. And so when I first get that initial penetration, it's going to sink in very easy, but then you're going to encounter that resistance because the material is going to stretch. Whatever you're forcing into is going to need to stretch open because you're sticking something into it, right? And so all of that cutting, majority of that stretch is still being done by this forward section of the actual blade here, the forward section of the blade here. And so you're penetrating with this very sharp tip opposed from cutting, right? Because with a Tonto, you're still penetrating, obviously, but it's doing a lot of cutting. This here is more stretching the material around the belly and around the blade, which is what's actually causing the cut into material in an actual penetration. So it doesn't penetrate very easily, but it's still a decent, the first bit does. If poking, it pokes amazingly easily. I mean, takes no energy, almost no energy to actually force this in about that far, but you are going to have to work a little bit to get it in further than that. But it still gets through that initial penetration very well, which is important because harder material with the reinforced tip, punching through that harder material, getting that initial cut is very important. And getting that initial hole, right? Getting that initial penetration, whether it's clothing, it's a coat, whatever, denim, nylon, a book, whatever it's going to be. And so getting that first penetration started and then having it stretch around the actual blade does make it, it does make it a good penetrator. It makes it sink into material decently well. And so you've got the belly aspect of it. You're able to use that. You've got a decently reinforced tip. And then if you choose, you're in a fighting knife, right? Because, most of the examples that I gave for historical versions of these knives were all fighting knives, right? And there's a kind of a reason for that. And it really does have that more tactical, that more fighting purpose to it. And if you decide to sharpen the spine or sharpen the clip on one of these, I don't actually have a knife with a sharpened clip anymore. I sold the only one that I've actually ever done this to. You can imagine here, you sharpen this spine and it's almost like a little hawkbill blade. You've got the performance aspect of a hawkbill on the back of your Bowie knife. So you got the slashing aspect, the cutting aspect, and then you've got that major grabbing and hooking of material with the spine of your blade. If you're going to do any sort of drop cutting, things like that, hooking, you can hook material, grab a hold of something. So having a sharpened clip on a Bowie knife is a very aggressive but very, it works very well. I don't quite know the word I want to use there, but I mean, it does work. It's very purposeful in its design. So I think clip points are my favorite. I don't think it's the best for survival or general utility, but as far as just my favorite and carrying around, man, I just can't get over the look of that knife. It's just so dope. That's why I bought this 63 opposed to any of the other ones. That's it. Y'all have a good one.